Good morning, everybody. We're continuing on in summoning folks to beis din. So we have a machlokas here of the beis and the shach. The beis says that if the fellow says, "I'm not coming until you tell me the claim," that's not valid, and the shach says, "No, you have to tell him the claim outside of beis din." That's a valid argument. How do we paskin? Ramosha has an interesting tshuva here in Choshen Mishpat, Chelik Beis, Siman Vav, page 13. Zok Ramosha says like this. You'll notice, by the way, this tshuva is being written to Rav Mordechai Tendler. Rav Mordechai Tendler, of course, is his grandson, Ramosha Tendler's son. So he says like this. This tshuva is written in 1971. When someone brings his friend to beis din, the tovea, the claimant, does not have to say to tell the defendant the particulars of the matter. Mashu tovea, what he's claiming. This was what Rav Moshe had wrote, and they're questioning: does that mean that he paskins like the beis, that you don't need to say the claim? He says, no, we hold like the shach, that you do have to relate the claim. Now he says, why, according to the shach, do you have to relate the claim? The reason why he believes, according to the shach, you have to relate the claim is because maybe the nitzba, the defendant, when he hears of the claim and what the claim is, and the claim is for a small amount of money, he will easily make a negotiation and avoid the entire process of going to beis din. He says, Lamaisa, when a reputable beis din is sending a hazmana, you could assume that the beis din understood that the amount of money we're dealing with is too large, that the defendant would not easily settle, or the circumstances are where it was not easily settled. Also, most batei dinim call up the defendant first and say, hey, do you want to settle this case before we go to a din Torah? So because of both of those things, he says, even though technically we paskin like the shach, that you need to state the claim, the reasons why the shach says you need to state the claim are no longer operable. A, because the beis din generally calls up and says, look, do you want to try to settle this case so we don't need to drag you to din Torah? And furthermore, that very often they know that the person, the nitzba, already knows the amount of money. It's already clear that he's not going to settle. And even if he is going to settle, sometimes beis din thinks sending the hazmana is just going to spur a settlement. So for that reason, you don't have to actually say the claim. However, if there is some sort of suffix that the beis din feels that if they state the claim, that will encourage a person to settle, then in Achinami they should state the claim. Okay, let's look on page 15, the Gemara Baba Kama Kufya Gimel Amud Aleph. Just 1 second, please. Kufya Gimel Amud Aleph says, we already learned in another Gemara that you need to establish a time when you're going to summon the fellow to beis din, and if he doesn't come that time, in Moed Katan, we give him another chance. Practically, how do we do it? It says Rav Chisda with the Greyas on page 15. Kovin zman sheni v'chamishi v'sheni zimna v'zimna basar zimna ulamachar kasvinan. You tell the person you're going to come Monday to court. You're being summoned to court. He doesn't come, you summon him Thursday. He doesn't come, you give him till the next Monday. And then on Tuesday, that's after 3 chances, now we write that the fellow is misarev l'din, is in excommunication. The Gemara has a story. Rav Asi ikla be Rav Kana. Rav Asi visited Yeshiva Rav Kana. Chaza hi itza da azmre ledina b'fanyo v'tzafra kasav le pische. So Rav Kana summoned the woman to beis din in the afternoon, and the next morning he already put her into excommunication for not going up to beis din. Amar leilo sovel amar lahadam Rav Chisda kovitz man sheni v'chamish. I understand you. Give this poor lady a chance. She gets 3 summonses, Monday, Thursday, Monday, and only the subsequent Tuesday. You summoned her one day, and the next day you're already writing an excommunication. Rav Kana responded, Hani Mili Gavra da honest Masa. That's true in the circumstance of beyond someone's control. He's not living in town. This lady was in town, and I assume you could say in town it's like a small village or whatever it is. It wasn't like, someone in New York. They may not get the summons. They may get stuck in traffic. They may have other things that day, and she doesn't even come in contact the beis din. She's rebellious. And of course, we already learned this on what?
They have to say no lo nala.
No, she just doesn't have to show up. If you say lo nala, then right away. That's what Dustin Avim said.
Just saying it right away, essentially.
What?
You could be borrowed that lo nala.
That right, and this is the same type of thing. She was in town. She was rebellious, and we already learned yesterday on page 16. This is how it's established in the Shulchan Aruch that we give 3 hazmanas, 3 chances. If you don't come, we put you into excommunication. Now, Rav Moshe Shternbach Shlita on page 17 in Chuvas Van Hagos explains how this works, practically speaking. He first brings down, I'm sorry, it's not where the gray is, that even if both litigants agree to adjudicate the matter in front of a non-Jewish court, and even if the non-Jewish court will agree to follow Jewish law, asur, that's asur. He uses very strong language. The person is a rasha. It's like he's blaspheming against the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, even if both parties are agreeable to go to a secular court. Now, if the defendant refuses to go to a Jewish court, then the claimant gets permission from beis din, and he can save his assets in front of a secular court. This we call popularly today a heter erkos. So, he says, how does it work? Min hagenu po'ir HaKodesh, how does it say work in Yerushalayim Bir HaKodesh? That the beis din summons him 3 times, and if he doesn't come to beis din after 3 summonses, so then they give permission to the plaintiff to pursue the matter any way he seems fit, including going to a secular court. He's saying that's how it practically works in Yerushalayim. Of course, there is a robust rabbinic court in Eretz Yisrael. It's actually far more authoritative than the courts here, because the courts here, they all rely that you're signing an arbitration agreement. It's not actually binding from a court system. In Eretz Yisrael, the rabbinic court is binding from a court system, and furthermore, they do have certain powers of enforcement that we don't have in America. And if a Jewish court decides a case that means based on arbitration, someone's reluctant to pay, the only way you're going to enforce it is by going subsequently to secular court. They don't have the ability to foreclose on people's properties or seize assets or bank accounts or freeze things. It just doesn't work. The rabbinic court in Eretz Yisrael is much more serious because they do have those abilities, and they could incarcerate people if they feel the need to achieve compliance. What?
It also creates a countervailing problem in terms of, because they're using enforcement mechanisms that are not necessarily Torah-based enforcement mechanisms.
Well, that's a whole other conversation, but the rabbinic court in Eretz Yisrael does use enforcement mechanisms. In fact, it's really a side point. There was a famous case recently, I'm sure you may have heard of it or not, that a gentleman was refusing, or a certain Hasidic community against another Hasidic community refused to give his wife a get for quite some time, and he got a heter mei rabbanim. And a heter mei rabbanim is that you get permission for 100 rabbis signing to marry another woman because he wanted to get remarried. And according to most approaches, a heter mei rabbanim has to be concurrent with taking a get and depositing it by beis din, so that the woman can come and collect the get. Normally, a heter mei rabbanim is used when the woman doesn't want to receive the get. He sort of twisted things around, and he got a heter mei rabbanim and never gave the get to a beis din to deposit so that the woman could receive it. He claims he did give it to a beis din, but the beis din said, okay, if you want the get, you need certain conditions to be fulfilled, which is usually not how it works. So what happened was that one of the signatories on the Heter Rabbanim went to Eretz Yisrael, and the lady got an attorney in Eretz Yisrael to take the matter to the rabbinic court in Eretz Yisrael, and the rabbinic court has a concept that if you're ma'agen a woman, you go to jail. But for the first time in history, they said that the husband wasn't there. The husband was in America. That the rabbi, because he signed on to Heter Rabbanim, was causing the woman to be ma'agen, and he tried to leave Eretz Yisrael to go back to America for his grandkids' chasana, and they didn't let him leave. They put an ikul yitzian. And then he tried to sneak out using a different passport, and they caught it, and they put him in jail. You heard about this?
No, but we're not going to get away with that. Can he even recant if he wants to once he's signed on?
Well, that's not the issue. The issue was, well, sort of.
They would only put him in jail if the theory is, because then he'll recant and
Well,
do it.
let's understand what happened. They put him in jail, and within 24 hours, she had her get. So, Lamaisa was very, very, very effective. Okay?
That's on the right side.
What?
That's on the right side.
Right, but it was the first time it had been used against someone who had signed the Heter Rabbanim who wasn't the husband. But it was the rabbinic court. It was not the secular court in Israel. In any event, based on Rabbani. In any event, okay, so he raised an important issue here. What about when you know that the opposing party is not going to go to a Jewish court? So do you need to go through the whole rigmarole of 3 times? So he says no. You could just summon them once, or you don't have to bother summoning them. Just ask permission from beis din. V'tam adavar nira she'ikar dinar she'tzarach level of beis din. Why do you have to go to beis din? Because it's isra chomer to go to a secular court. But if you know the other party is not going to go to beis din, right? So then there's another halacha, the covet of the beis din. For that, just ask the beis din once, okay? And then they could give a ksav sirov, and they could adjudicate the court in our cause, okay? So this is how we say practically when you're dealing with someone who you know will not come to a court. Someone told me someone told me that a bunch of years ago, maybe it was before it was bought out, they got into a fight with El Al Airlines. It was a big mishpacha of 8-9 people, and El Al Airlines bumped them in the middle onto another plane and refused to compensate them. Usually the standard practice is if you bump someone arbitrarily, the airline has to compensate you. So they went to a Rav, do we need to take El Al to a Jewish court? He said, no, they're never going to go to a Jewish court. So just go to a secular court. And of course they did, and they got some of the money back. Okay. So now, on page 18, how do you do the summoning to a court? So Rav has an interesting approach. That you need the 3 judges to sit together and to ask the agent of beis din to go and summon the nitzbah. And the agent of beis din has to say, I'm coming on behalf of the 3 judges to summon you to court. All right? And this is how he paskins seemingly in Shulchan Aruch on page 19. Sim and Yeralef Sif Beis, Shliach Sha'amar Ploni Shlachani. If an agent says, Ploni sent me to summon you to court, it's garnished. Ein kosel pischa shel shamta. You cannot excommunicate until the agent of beis din goes to the defendant and says, I'm summoning you in the name of the 3 dayanim. Says the Mechaber, what are we talking about? Shaholach hashlich, the agent goes on a day when normally the judges don't sit. Aval bayom hayadua, but if the agent goes on a day when normally the judges sit, so therefore, even if the agent says, I'm only summoning you in the name of one of the judges, it's clear that all the 3 judges are there. If that's true, then you only need to say in the name of one of the judges, and it really means in the name of the 3 of the judges. Okay? This is not how we pass on halacha l'maisa. Halacha l'maisa, when you're summoned to court, the judges don't even know what happened. Okay? And let's look on page 21, and with this we'll end. Let's do what we do halacha l'maisa. Bizmanenu noagin lahazmid es hanitzvah yidei mazker beis din v'chasim es hayayan v'af shlo yamosha beis hagach. It's no such thing that today the 3 judges sit down and say, the toveya, the claimant, wants to bring the nitzvah to court, let's summon him. That's not how it works. The secretary of the beis din, he's called the Safra D'Daina, he writes a letter that you're being summoned. It's after you agree to the summons. Now only then does he put together the beis din from the roster of dayanim that he has. So what's the reason? He writes that the whole reason you need 3 people is the implication of the Gemara is only then will you put the person into excommunication. That is the implication of how it's actually brought down in Shulchan Aruch. Ein kosel pischa shasham tetshom b'shem shasha. You don't write a writ of excommunication until you do it in the name of all 3 judges. So if you're going to take such a serious step against a person to excommunicate them, which has practical halachas in terms of davening, in terms of business, in terms of aliyos, it's back in the day when it was enforced, it meant something. So if that's the case, you would need 3 people to start the process to sit and summon the fellow. But today, we don't do that. We don't write writs of excommunication. All that happens to a person practically, if he doesn't show up to court after 3 times, is that Tovea, the claimant, gets a heter arkos, gets permission to go to secular court, pursue it however way he wants. In that case, you don't need to start out with 3 people, even if you're just informed, even if none of the dayanim are aware of it, that still is valid in order to produce a heter arkos if you don't show up after 3 summonses. Okay. Everybody should have a wonderful day. We'll continue.